What's going on, my beautiful people, and welcome to another episode of the Hustle Coast podcast. And today we have an absolutely amazing guest on the show. He is a music and entertainment lawyer, artist advocate, and host of the Cigar City radio podcast. I give you Randy Ojeda.
Hey, what's going on? You got the last name right too. Nice work.
Hey, I had to roll my R, man. You know?
You got to. You got to put that accent on there. I know. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Really love the show and excited to chop it up.
100%, man. Me too. And, you know, when me and you, because I've met you fairly recently, I'd say we've known each other now maybe a couple months probably. I mean, I've heard of you before, like we kind of chatted for the first time.
Right.
But I was really excited to get you on, man, because like I was telling you off camera, you know, I know that you have just so much knowledge and to be able to help so many artists out there and steer them in the right direction is going to be so valuable for a lot of people.
I hope so. Yeah, you know, I try. I do my best, you know.
100%.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. So when I do my interviews, I do always like to start from the very beginning. You know, where were you born? What was your childhood, family like? All of those things.
Oh, yeah. Born and raised in Tampa, Florida. My mom's Dominican, my dad's Cuban, so I had a little bit of flavor on both sides, you know. From born and raised in Tampa. I've always been into music like my whole life. I started playing in bands when my first band, I think I was 11 or 12 when I started playing in that band. Played in bands all throughout high school and college, and you know, I played bass and sang too. So did a lot of that for years and years. And then after I graduated, went to University of South Florida. Shout out, go Bulls! You know?
Hey, shout out USF.
Yeah. So I went to USF. After USF, I decided I was going to go to law school. You know, and I kind of put the music thing on the back burner a little bit. You know, I didn't think I was going to do much with music anymore. I just, you know, figured I'd go to law school, do the traditional lawyer route, and, you know, see where I ended up. And then while I was in law school, I started managing a rapper, which is not normally what people do when they're in law school, but it's
Right.
what I did. You know, I just met somebody that needed the help, and, you know, my skill set fit really well. So I started managing. Next thing I know, I'm managing a bunch of artists. I'm managing producers. I'm just, you know, doing the whole thing, you know. So I started my management company, Cigar City Management. And when I graduated from law school, instead of being a lawyer, I was just like, I'm just going to be an artist manager. You know, I really liked what I was doing. I was enjoying the career path, and you know, the legal hiring market wasn't great when I graduated. It was, you know, so I just figured I'd have a better shot going into the music industry. You know, so I did that for almost a decade. I also did A&R for Symphonic Distribution, you know, which is a distribution company based out of Tampa. So I did A&R for them. I was flying all over the country, like, you know, signing bands, meeting artists, doing deals. It was a lot of fun. And then the pandemic happened, and suddenly my schedule became very, very light for obvious reasons. And that's when I kind of decided, you know, now if I was ever going to switch things up and become a lawyer, you know, now is the time to do it. I didn't have anything else to do. And over the years, I just saw how necessary music attorneys were, and how, you know, so few of them were out there, and the only ones that were really worth it, I guess, were like, you know, attorneys who were ridiculously expensive, you know, prohibitively expensive for most artists. You know, they were only serving, you know, the Drakes and the Taylor Swifts of the world. And, you know, I had this idea that I was like, well, I could be that music lawyer for the independent artists, you know, because I feel like there's a lot of independent artists out there who are signing deals they don't understand, who are, you know, signing deals without representation, who are just, you know, their rights are all up in the air, and, you know, it's like there's nobody to advocate for them. So I took the bar exam and opened up my shop, you know, right after that, and haven't looked back. So
That's crazy.
I know you want to start from the very beginning, but that's that's the run through, you know?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I definitely have, and we're going to get into all that today. You know, whenever I sit down with someone, I always like to really dig in, you know what I mean? To see what like made them, you know, who they are. So I do want to take a couple steps back, but we're going to come back to all that. I promise.
Please. Yeah. That's the overview.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
So,
that's the overview. I love it. So first off, I just want to shout out, not many people that I know are born and raised in Tampa, Florida. So shout out to that because, you know, I feel like Tampa is such a melting pot these days, people from everywhere. So, you know, me and you, bro, are both, I guess you could say Tampanians, you know, born and raised Tampa Bay, man. So that's awesome. I didn't know that about you.
100%. Yeah, I'm a huge Bucks fan, Rays fan, you know, Lightning fan.
Oh, yeah.
Love the city of Tampa. I went to law school in Chicago, but moved back, you know, as soon as we could because I just love it here, and you know, this is the family, and this is the city, you know.
Oh, 100%, man, 100%. So let me ask this: when you were growing up, first off, were you an only child? Did you have siblings?
No, I have an older brother. He's 10 years older than me, so quite a big difference. But he was definitely a big part of getting me into music from an early age because, you know, he was like super into metal, so he had like his Metallica and Pantera CDs and Slayer and stuff like that. And, you know, once I started getting into music, I was like, I got to start, you know, I would steal CDs from his room all the time and either burn copies or just listen to it until he found out that I stole it and then he'd take it back, you know. But I got into a lot of music because of him, for sure. He took me to my first concert, you know.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Big shout out to him, man. Wow. That's epic. Okay.
Absolutely.
And then, so like when you were growing up, did your parents have a big emphasis on education? Because again, I know that, you know, becoming a lawyer, obviously you have to go to a lot of school.
Yeah, no, absolutely. My parents always valued education. My mom is a teacher herself. She teaches, you know, preschool, but still she's an educator. And, you know, both my parents, like from the very beginning, you know, basically were like, oh, you gotta study hard and you know, you gotta make something of yourself. You know, that we didn't, you know, you hear the same thing from a lot of immigrant families where the parents are like, you know, we sacrifice so much to come to this country, you know, you got to work hard and, you know, do it for us and all this stuff. So, that was kind of the mentality I was brought up in, was like, you know, my family did sacrifice a lot, you know, both the Cuban side and the Dominican side to be immigrants in this country and, you know, come here legally and do things the right way. And, you know, they didn't want me to just be, you know, they didn't want me to take that for granted. And I never have, you know.
That's amazing, man. 100%. Yeah. I love that. And so as you're growing up, it's you and your brother, you guys are in Tampa. He kind of ignites your love for music. And then like, at what point do you really just like take off with it yourself and just like, cause I imagine at some point you had to really fall in love with music, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it was when I got my my first guitar, you know. My parents got me a guitar one Christmas, and, you know, I just fell in love with music at that point and just kept, you know, playing. And I switched to bass because all of my other friends played guitar, you know, and it's like, if you want to be in a band, you can't have like 5 guitar players, you know.
Right.
So I switched to bass, and then suddenly everybody wanted me in their band because nobody had a bass, you know. So So yeah, definitely it was around middle school was when I like really like got into music. I went from like, you know, I was a big sports kid. I'm still a big sports guy, but like I was, you know, playing baseball, and that was like my after school activity. And then you know, once I hit middle school, I was like, well, you know, I'd really like to focus on music. Like I'd like to play the instruments and learn as much about music as I could. And you know, had some like-minded friends, so we started a little garage band, you know, where we were covering AC/DC and Van Halen songs and stuff like that. And, you know, people thought it was cute because we were like, you know, we were like 12 years old, but we were playing, you know, classic rock songs and stuff. And then we got a little bit older and we weren't as cute, and that kind of ended. But, you know, I kept it going. When I was in high school, I joined another band. We started playing metal music, you know, a lot heavier, much more fun in many ways. And, you know, it just took hold. Like music became my thing, you know. And over time I just learned that, like, not everybody is going to be the lead singer of the band or the primary artist or whatever. It's like, I learned how many other roles there are in the industry and how much work goes on behind the scenes, and I think that's kind of how I ended up where I am.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's a great point. There are so many other things. Obviously, you're a primary testament to somebody who can find success in music, but not necessarily just doing music or just pursuing as an artist.
Exactly.
So that's epic, man. Okay, so you graduate high school. We'll skip. You go to USF, which big shout out to USF. My mom went to USF, and by the way, she's also a teacher, so our moms have that in common.
There we go.
Right? And then, so now when you're going to USF, did you already know you were going to be going into law?
Not really. I went to law school, or I went to USF like right when like the recession was having the last recession. I don't know how many recessions we've had since then, but you know what I mean? Like right. It was like the 2008 recession, Okay. And I knew I had to do something after I graduated, but the job market was just horrendous for students at the time, and there just wasn't a lot of opportunities. So I just thought, well, if I go to law school, I can delay the real world for another 3 years, and then I got something that's marketable that I can hopefully get a job in 3 years, Yeah. So that was kind of my idea. It definitely wasn't planned. Like I was a psychology major, so I had nothing to do with law. I didn't know I was going to do it at all, but it just seemed like a good fit for me. It seemed like it worked with my skills, and did pretty well on the LSAT and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, yeah, let me just go to law school and see what happens.
Man, that's epic, dude.
Yeah.
That's crazy. You know what I mean? Because like I would have thought, I guess I would have thought that, you would have, I don't know. It's just whenever you hear somebody's, a lawyer, you kind of probably think like, okay, that was like their plan from childhood or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's really cool.
I mean, I definitely always had an inkling, like I had like an interest in being a lawyer. I just didn't really know everything that lawyers do exactly. Because, once I learned about like the courtroom and litigation and stuff, I was like, man, I really don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to be in court arguing with people all the time. That's just not me. It's not my vibe. And then, once you get into law school, you learn about this whole other side of the legal world, transactional law, where people are doing contracts and making deals and negotiating. And, it's about, rather than it being about who's going to win, who's going to lose, it's about fairness. It's about like, how can we make the best deal for everybody? I just really like that concept. And that's kind of guided my path from there.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, 100%. I love that. So when people kind of like ask you, and I guess in some sense there is kind of like, okay, inevitable, but like, how do you explain what an entertainment and business lawyer does?
Great question. So, I say it's a little bit black letter law, so it's a little bit about like understanding what the law is and how, copyrights work, how trademarks work, that kind of thing. But it's also a lot about strategy too. It's about having somebody in your corner that, hey, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that. How can I make it happen? And having somebody that has the experience and has the tools to, really help you execute whatever your vision or your plan is, and then on top of that, obviously making sure the contracts are right, making sure, you're negotiating with your best foot forward and just kind of tying everything together. But, a lot of people think that entertainment lawyer is just there to look at the contract and tell you if it's okay or not. But it's like, there's so much more to it than that. And there's, so much that I think my clients value, that I can bring to the table that a lot of attorneys can't, given my background in the industry and everything I've done over the years.
Right. Because I can also imagine too, like just the fact that you've like managed artists and been an A&R, like all of those things probably gave you like so much firsthand experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in the trenches, like I know what it's like, both as an artist myself, as a manager, as a, a label person, an A&R, like I've done all these things, and it's, I'm not saying I know everything about everything, but I've been there, and a lot of attorneys don't have that experience. A lot of attorneys went straight from law school into whatever they're practicing now,
Right.
So to have somebody that's kind of been in the business for a while and then became a lawyer, I think makes a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Couldn't agree more. So at what stage do you think that an artist generally needs a lawyer?
Hold on. Biased question, or biased answer from me, but right away, like as early as possible in the process, that's when you need a lawyer. But that's my cop-out answer. My real answer is whenever you're collaborating with somebody. So whether that be, you're working with a producer or you're working with another artist on a feature, or, a manager's getting involved or something. It doesn't have to necessarily be a creative collaboration, but anytime you're working with somebody else, and this goes for all industries, all businesses, like once you bring somebody else in, you need paperwork. You need advice, you need counsel to make sure that you're protecting your interests, they're protecting their interests, and everybody has the expectations right from the beginning, right up front, and knows, what they're getting into. So
yeah,
that would be my answer, and even if it's like, a lot of times people are like, oh, well, I'm just making music with my friends, and, nobody's going to stab me in the back or whatever. Like, you'd be surprised. Like, if something pops off and things start blowing up, it's crazy how weird people get, even if it's your best friend. So I'd say, for the protection of the relationship, the friendship, whatever it is, like, get the paperwork. It's much easier to do it when you're all friends and you're all cool with each other than later when you're at each other's throats,
Yeah, no, 100%. That definitely makes sense, because it's like even friends or potentially even family, like when there is money involved, people can act different.
Yeah, absolutely. No, once the money's involved, people act very different.
100%.
That is totally true.
100%. So I'm sure with this question, there's probably like multiple that come to mind, and obviously you kind of just answered it a little bit, but like, what do you think are some of the most common mistakes that you do see artists make, whether it's early in their career or even later?
So definitely, yeah, not making agreements with collaborators early on, and not having, not having the rights, written out and explicitly stated. But for me, like, honestly, one of the biggest mistakes I think is one of the easiest things to avoid, and that's just artists don't register their music correctly. Like registering on, performing rights organizations. So whether you're with BMI or ASCAP or CSAC or whatever in the States, like, you need to go and register your songs so that if something gets picked up, if something happens with your song, you're going to get royalties for it. And if you don't make that registration step, you're just leaving money on the table. So that's one thing I want artists to understand is, like, say you're releasing your music on DistroKid or, whatever distribution platform, like that platform is only collecting a small portion of your royalties. Whereas there's these other platforms like your performing rights organization, like the MLC, Sound Exchange, et cetera, that are collecting the other pieces of the pie and the rest of the royalties. And that's what's, really important. And I always see artists make that mistake. They think like, oh, I'm on DistroKid and they're sending me a check every month, so that's all I need, right? But no, there's actually a lot more money out there, on the publishing side and on the royalty side that you're missing if all you're doing is collecting from your distribution.
100%. And something that I actually learned somewhat recently, but is that even with BMI, you have to be registered as both an artist and a publisher.
Yes. Well, with BMI specifically, you can just be an artist and get the full publisher share. But like ASCAP, you have to be an artist and a publisher. Okay. So it's helpful on BMI to do both as well. Okay. Because if not, you're just kind of leaving that publisher share, out there. But technically, you could just be an artist without a publishing company. Right. But you'd be missing out on some royalties as well.
You'd be missing out on the publisher side. And basically, that's what you always hear about, how like those unclaimed royalties go to like the major artist payout or whatever, right?
Yes. The black box is what it's called. The ominous black box. So yeah, basically, those unclaimed royalties, after a certain period of time, they get put into the black box and redistributed to everybody else that has registered their songs. So it's crazy. It's like, you could be you could be owed money and that money's going to go to Mariah Carey or somebody else instead of you, you know? So it's super important to register your music appropriately,
Okay.
you know?
100%. 100%. And then for people who, let's say, maybe they don't know how to do that, do you just, obviously, I'm sure if someone hires you, you probably kind of coach them and walk them through. But I mean, do you think that just going on YouTube is enough for the average person, or do you think they really do need help and get walked through at least once?
It depends on how you learn, I guess. You know, I think that there's the problem with going on YouTube and finding this stuff is there's a lot of bad information out there too. So you want to make sure you're going to the right sources. And honestly, a few people have asked me to make a video kind of showing how to register music. So that might be something I do in the near future, so that I can get the right information out there. But you know, if you learn better by being more hands-on and doing things like the way I do it is if you do, you know, a copyright registration or song registration with me, I'll, you know, share my screen, you know, or walk you through it on your screen and show you like exactly step by step what you should do. And usually, you know, once you do one or two of them, it becomes pretty second nature and pretty easy to figure out. And people kind of get it from there. Like, you don't need a lawyer to register every single song for you every single time, you know, unless you just really don't have the time and you want somebody to do it for you, you know,
Right.
by all means, hire me to do it, you know, but
What you're saying is not rocket science. Once you see
It's
it done
not.
once or twice, you should probably be able to get it.
it's not unless you're doing something complicated, you know, like you know, classical music can be a little more challenging to register than, you know, normal music. You know, so unless you're doing something crazy, like you're probably going to be able to figure it out.
Yeah.
And you can even call
And let
the
me ask
performing
you-
rights organizations. You can even call them and they'll help you out, you know.
Okay, yeah, that's good. And even like specifically with BMI, obviously it's at a 200% compared to a lot of the other ones, maybe like ASCAP, where it's like 100%. So let's say, for example, someone has a split sheet, and let's say, you know, the beat maker or producer gets 50%, and then there's two features. Two writers. They both get 25%. So when that's being put in BMI, because it's at a 200 instead of 100, do you basically just multiply each one by 2 when you're registering that?
Yeah, you basically just double it,
Okay.
you know.
Yeah. Nice.
Because BMI doesn't differentiate between writer's share and publisher's share the way ASCAP does, you know. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. No, that's great information.
But that just makes it more confusing, right? Because, you know, now it's like 100%, 200%, you know, whatever. So,
right. Yeah, I'm going to be honest, man. Even for me, you know, I'm a BMI holder, and I've had issues where, like, I've been sitting here, like, scratching my head, like, man, is this supposed to be, like, 50 or 100? You know what I mean?
yeah,
like,
yeah.
But, so that was always a question I just wanted to clarify, because that's what I always thought, but I just wanted to make sure.
No, and it's, it can get messy, especially, like, if you're splitting stuff by a third or, you know, an odd percentage, like, you know, the math can get a little wonky.
Right.
But, you know, that's just how it is.
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
Yeah.
So some of these next questions I'm going to ask, I kind of am splitting it up a little bit. Like, these first questions I'm going to ask are kind of like, I want to say a little bit like geared toward maybe an artist who's looking at signing to a label. And then
Okay.
I have some more that are like more independent.
Sure. Love it.
Awesome. So based on what you've seen, when you're looking at label contracts, like, what does a standard record label deal look like in general?
Great question. So it really depends on the size of the label. So, starting with independent labels, you know, smaller labels, a lot of times you'll see, you know, kind of a 50-50 split between the artist and the label, sometimes a 60-40 in the artist's favor, you know, something like that. And that can, you know, typically with independent labels, you're seeing a licensing deal, not a copyright transfer. So what I mean by that is basically the independent label is going to have rights to your music, you know, that 50% right or 50% share or whatever for a number of years. In the independent sector, it could be anywhere from like 7 years all the way up to like 15 years, you know, 20 years. And they're basically going to be able to recoup that 50% for that amount of time. And then the music will revert back to you. So you'll basically get your rights back at the end of that period. So they're typically not taking ownership of your music. They're just licensing the rights to utilize it for a certain amount of time. Whereas with a major deal, if you're looking at a major, first off, the percentages are going to be, they're wildly different. So, I mean, it could be 60-40 in the label's favor. It could be 80-20 in the label's favor. It could be, there's a wide variety of label deals. But a lot of times, especially with major labels, they're going to outright own the master rights to your music. Like, they're going to own the copyright, oftentimes forever in perpetuity, sometimes for 50 years or 70 years or whatever it is, and you give up a lot more in that sense. And that's why you see a lot of artists these days like shying away from the major label deals, because they don't want to give up ownership of their music.
Right.
And obviously there's pros and cons to signing with a major label, but that's typically what the major deals look like. But they can vary wildly, and what's standard these days is so different for everybody. It's like, it's all based on where you are as an artist, your leverage, how much of an audience you're already bringing to the table, and what you can negotiate.
Yeah, 100%. That definitely makes sense. And I've always heard, I don't want to say every story that I've heard from people who've been with majors is negative, but I have heard like a sufficient amount of people who say, they got that big label deal, but then they got shelved, or, the label pushed them for a little while. And then once it kind of didn't work, it was kind of like, then they couldn't really go do other projects and things like that. So I do think that maybe there are like also some extra limitations when you do sign with a major as well, right?
Absolutely. And these days, the most valuable asset that an artist has is their catalog. So if you own the rights to your music, if it's yours, even if you're licensing it out to an independent for a few years or whatever it is, if you own those masters, you're in a much better bargaining situation than you are if you don't have catalog. Distributors, even labels, publishing companies, they're all buying up catalog. Like, they want to buy people's back catalog and the music that's already been released. And that's because, already released music and back catalog is much more predictable than a new song. If you have a track that, is on a bunch of playlists and a bunch of people have it in their library, and you're consistently getting, 100,000 streams a month on this one song, that's a lot more predictable and investable than if you're just going to put out a new album that could do well, could not do well. Like, you never know,
Right.
So
Yeah, no,
if you can bring that back catalog to the table and include it as part of your deal, you're going to get a much more favorable offer from whoever it is that's buying up that catalog.
Okay. That definitely makes sense. 100%.
Yeah.
What are some of the most important terms or clauses that an artist that might be looking to sign a label deal maybe should be aware of? Obviously, we talked about that split percentage, which is, maybe 80-20, 60-40 if it was licensed or if they own it in perpetuity. Is there anything else that comes to mind?
There's a lot, man. There's a lot for sure. I would say also looking at, there's the concept of like the 360 deal. A lot of people know that term 360 deal, but they don't really know what that means. And,
Right.
that means like you're going to sign a deal where they're going to take from multiple buckets, right? So the bucket that a label typically takes from is your distribution bucket. So put song on Spotify, song earns $100, label gets 50, you get 50. You know what I mean? That's like the simple part of it. But when a label starts dipping into your publishing, now they're getting, like I said, DistroKid doesn't collect all your royalties. Now all of a sudden they're getting, more than they typically would get. Or if they cut into your merchandise, I mean, that's a huge deal, so being aware of how the label is going to get their money and how, they're going to pay back your advance. And that's the other thing. Another great clause to think about is an advance in general, because a lot of people think like, oh, I got a big advance. That's money in my pocket. Yes, it's money in your pocket right now, but you need to pay that advance back. It's not just free money that you get. Like it's more of a loan than anything else. So being clear on the terms of recoupment and, what happens if you don't recoup within a certain amount of time. Like, usually the contract gets extended for an extra period, or, there could be penalties. Like there's a lot that goes into advances that artists don't really think about. They just see the big number, the big bag, and we're like, sweet, let's go to the club,
Right.
And that's just
buy
not
a car.
right. Not a good investment to buy a car with your advance,
Right, 100%. And yeah,
So.
Speaking of horror stories, those are also like some of the ones that I've heard where it's like, a label will pay for the studio time, they'll pay for flights or hotels or whatever, but then the artist doesn't even realize that they're the ones who are going to be floating the bill at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And that's something to look at too, is, putting caps on the spend, like not letting a label just spend money without your approval or without, proper authorization, because it can get really expensive, because at the end of the day, that is money that you have to pay back,
Yeah, 100%.
So.
And I love how you just said, putting caps, because, in a contract, ideally, if you do have some leverage, then you probably could negotiate something like that. Like, hey, I don't want you guys spending all of this money and I'm not even like aware of it.
Right. So, typically you'll see like a clause that says something like, any single expense over $5,000 or whatever has to be approved by the artist, or, any, aggregate expenses over $50,000 over the course of a month or 2 months, or, whatever. It depends on what the budget is. Right. But, you'll usually, try to cap it in increments like that.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Awesome. And what are your thoughts on artists signing deals through DMs, emails, and handshake agreements?
Oh, no. Don't, none of the above, no DM deals, no handshake agreements. I mean, email is one thing, but like, you want to get things written down and on paper. Like, handshake deals are not going to hold up in court. Like they're not going to help you out in the long run. And I promise you, even if you think you have everything sorted out in a handshake deal or in a DM or whatever, you're missing something. Like there's some part of it that, that's why contracts exist, so that, you have a comprehensive overview of what the arrangement is. So yeah, don't do deals through DMs or handshakes. Like, if again, this goes back to the first question, where it was, when should you get a lawyer? You should get a lawyer when you're collaborating with somebody. If somebody hits your DMs and is like, yo, let's do a deal, I want to sign you, that's when you should call a lawyer.
Yeah. I like that 100%. And I think every artist can probably say at some point, we've all received the fake email of, hey, I'd love to sign you. All I need is $200 to get you to get you going.
Yeah. And a legitimate label is not going to ask for money up front. For, I forget what the scammers try to call it, but they call it like an admin fee or something like that. And it's like, nah, like if they're going to sign you, they're going to sign you, one scam I see a lot is where, the quote unquote label says like, oh, we want to fly you out to LA, blah, blah. But, you cover your expenses and then we'll pay you back later, and it's like, that's not how it works. Like if a label wants you to go to LA or New York or wherever they're based out of, they're going to pay to fly you out there, even if you're not signed with them yet.
Wow.
That's just how the business is.
Awesome. So. That's a gem right there. So if anybody is out there, you ever receive, a label telling you, hey, we want to have a meeting, but you got to pay for it.
Nah, that's a red flag right there, if I've ever heard.
Nice.
100%.
Yeah. And what legal documents should be in place before working with a manager or an agent?
So with a manager, you definitely need a management agreement. It needs to very clearly spell out how long the manager is going to be working with you, and what royalties they're entitled to. So again, management contracts are a little more comprehensive than label contracts when it comes to where they're getting money from, because typically, a label should only be getting money from record sales, whereas a manager is going to get money from most areas of revenue. Most ways that you're going to get money, the manager's going to get 15 or 20%. If you make $1, they're making 20 cents. So you definitely need to deal with a manager, a comprehensive management agreement, and it needs to state, the term, it needs to state the percentage, it needs to state a big thing that artists don't realize is a lot of managers, put in what's called a sunset clause. So a sunset clause is basically after your deal is done with the manager, they're going to continue to get revenue for a certain period of time post deal, post term, which kind of, like, for some people doesn't make sense. It kind of makes sense for the manager, of course, because, let's say you're working with a manager and your album comes out 6 months after you're done working with them, but they spent a whole year, getting features and production and doing all this work for you, and then the album comes out after their management term. That's kind of not fair to them. They put in all this work and then they don't get any payout. So that's kind of why sunset clauses exist, but sometimes they're like very overreaching, where like, you'll have an artist that's still paying a manager like 4 or 5 years down the line, that because they signed this clause, that manager's entitled to that income. But, at that point you could have another manager and now you're paying 20% to one guy and 20% to another person, it's like you're paying double commissions, and that can definitely be a bummer. So I always say, like, be careful with sunset clauses. With a good manager, they're gonna fight for that sunset clause, and it's probably warranted, but just make sure it makes sense and it's not overreaching. But definitely one of the biggest things I see in management deals.
That's great advice.
On the agency side, so this is interesting. I actually don't see that many agent contracts. So there probably should be more, and at the higher level, there's definitely more contracts with agencies. But a lot of times with an agent, it's just like, if I book it, I get paid. I get my 10% or whatever, and then that's it. At least at the more independent level. But once once you're signing with William Morris or CAA or something like that, then there's going to be representation papers.
Got it. Awesome. No, that's some great information right there. Okay, so now kind of turning our sights on the more independent side. So what types of contracts should indie artists be familiar with? From split sheets to what other documents would you say?
Split sheets for sure. Production agreements, collaboration agreements. Those are the main ones, but also work for hire agreements and side artist agreements. So a work for hire is typically seen with like session musicians. So say you hire somebody to play guitar on your track. Most of the time that guitar player is not going to get a percentage of the song, unless they wrote the guitar part on their own or they contributed to the writing, then, maybe they could negotiate some publishing. But most time, let's say you already have the part written, you just need somebody to come in and play it, that's going to be a work for hire agreement. So you're going to pay them up front, and then they're not going to get any royalties on the back end. Super important to get those agreements in place, because if you don't have that agreed to, that guitar player could come back and say, oh, well, I'm actually owed X percentage because, we don't have a work for hire agreement. Side artist agreement is kind of the same thing, but with features. So you get an artist to do a verse on a track, have them sign a side artist agreement that says the same things. Like, I'm paying you, $1,000 for this feature, and then that's all you're going to get. You're not going to get any more royalties after that, So those are like the big ones is collab agreements, production agreements, side artists, work for hire. Those are going to cover most of your bases early on.
Nice. I like that. And then so let's say somebody wanted to get those documents. Obviously, I'm sure that you probably draft those documents and you help people with obtaining those documents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'll draft those. And every situation's a little bit different. So you probably could go online and Google work for hire musician agreement and download something that's, probably like 70% of the way there, but it's like that extra 30%, like that's why you should hire a lawyer, because again, every situation is going to be a little bit different. There might be some things that you need in there that isn't necessary in all other agreements, or some things that you could take out. Like it's very particular based on the artist and their situation. But yeah, that's definitely something I do, something I provide, and I'm always happy to work on those kinds of documents.
Yeah, 100%. And speaking of documents, just to take a quick pivot here to sync.
Mm-hmm.
When you're registering and you're getting all your paperwork right for sync. So I know it's probably a lot of the same things. You got your split sheet, producer agreement, collaboration agreement. Now in sync, we're also talking about probably a one-stop and a metadata sheet, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So yeah, and oftentimes I put the one-stop clearance like in the sync, in the split sheet, or in the collaboration agreement, or in the production agreement, or whatever, so that you don't often need a completely separate agreement for one stop. But if you're looking for sync, and everybody should be thinking about sync all the time, because that's just one of the most lucrative avenues in the music industry right now. So you should have paperwork that says, who has clearance to approve the song for various usage. And, if that's one stop, that needs to be stated too. So if you're listening and you have no idea, we keep saying the word one stop, and you're like, what the heck does one stop mean? One stop means that if, say, somebody, Apple wants to use your song in an iPhone commercial, and rather than having to get approval from the songwriter, the producer, the featured artist, all these people that are involved that have rights, if somebody has one stop clearance, that means that they're the one person that gets to decide if the song is cleared or not. So Apple doesn't have to go to 5 different places to get approval. They go to one person who has those approval rights and can approve it on behalf of everybody else. And Apple is a big name. Like they can do their due diligence and get clearance from anybody. But if it's like a TV show or a small film or something like that, they don't want to go through the time and the effort to clear, to get clearance from multiple parties. Like they want one stop. They want to be able to, especially like these network shows, like these shows on like CBS and stuff, like your, Chicago Fire and Chicago Med and all these shows, and NCIS, like that are like pumping out, 25, 30 episodes a season and new episodes every week. Like a lot of times they want really fast approvals because their episode airs tomorrow and they don't have music yet, So if you can get one-stop clearance on your tracks, you're already going to put yourself in a much more advantageous position for sync,
Got it. 100%. No, that's great insight. And that's something I've been learning about just recently, shout out to the Sync Music Placement Conference, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where you were a speaker there and I attended, and that was awesome, man. There was some great info there too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's something a lot of people don't think about, is like who, if you're cutting all these people into a record, and that's the thing, is a lot of times people are like, well, I don't have money, so I'm just going to give people percentages, right? And that can really backfire on you if something pops off, because now, this producer and that producer and this person, all these people that you gave 5% to or 10% or whatever, if you don't have one-stop clearance rights, or they could potentially block a big opportunity for your song because you gave them a percentage instead of just paying them up front,
Sure. Let me ask you this. When doing this, could be related to sync or not, just in like a regular collab. Like, does each person need to get their own document signed? Like, let's say that the other artist, there's a split sheet established and they're like, okay, I have this, and maybe they either do or don't send you a copy. Ideally they would. But
Right.
like, should you also be advocating, okay, I signed yours, now you need to sign mine?
No, you would have one document that oversees the whole agreement. So it could be drafted by you, it could be drafted by the collaborator. It depends on who puts it together, but usually you'll see language in an agreement that says like this agreement supersedes all other negotiations or all other any discussions that we had prior to the agreement, and it basically you'll have one agreement that controls.
Okay, that makes sense for sure.
But good question for sure.
Yeah. And how important would you say it is for artists to, this is kind of on a sidebar here, but to trademark their name or logo or have an LLC?
Super important. So having an LLC, first, I'll start there. Very important. Anytime you're doing, and again, this goes for industries outside of music too. This goes for any industry. If you're doing business with other people, you're opening yourself up to liability. So by forming an LLC, that's what's called a limited liability company. So you're basically limiting your liability in a situation where you do get sued, and you're rather than suing you personally and your personal assets, they would sue the business and the business's assets. So say the business doesn't have any more money, the business goes bankrupt and it's not affecting your personal finances, So super important to have a limited, an LLC, or an S corp or some kind of company structure if you're doing business with anybody. Definitely important in the music industry for sure. But trademarking, great point. I also think it's very important to trademark your name and your logo if you have a logo. A lot of people don't have logos anymore, So, but trademarking your name is super important, just because you never know when somebody else is gonna come up with the same name. Especially if you have a name that's not like super tied to who you are as a person. I don't want to give any examples because I feel bad, but like if you're right. if you have a little bit more of a generic name, right. It might be smart to trademark it early, because somebody else starts using the name, it causes confusion in the marketplace. There's 2 or 3 Spotify accounts all with the same name. There's you have to get like a separate Instagram with an underscore and other bullshit to like. Oh, sorry, can I curse on this?
Yeah, you can.
Okay, all right. With other stuff to like differentiate your username and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's super important to trademark. And then the thing about trademarking that I always tell people is it also takes a while. Like the government is pretty slow. So it could take, 12 to 16 to 18 months to get a trademark registered. And that's assuming you worked with a lawyer and you did it correctly from the beginning. Because if you make mistakes and you have to update the registration, it could take way longer. Right. So just think about like, okay, you're an artist today. Where am I going to be in 18 months? Am I going to be at a level that it makes sense for me to have a trademark on my name? Maybe not. Then if that's your goal, if your goal is to become a household name, then you want to trademark your name as soon as you can.
Yeah. No, 100%. That definitely makes sense. So, if you could give your younger self one piece of advice coming up, what do you think that would be?
Oh man, me personally, my younger self, oof. Honestly, I would just tell myself to go to more shows and listen to more music, which is kind of an insane thing to think about because I've listened to so much music and gone to so many shows. But most of the opportunities that have come my way are because, I was in the right room at the right time, and if you want to be anybody in your local music scene, whether you want to be a promoter, a band, a sound engineer, like whatever it is that you're trying to do, going to shows is how you're going to meet like-minded people that are doing similar things, and that's where that's where the best networking comes in. And, if I could go back to being, in high school, rather than going to a friend's house and partying there, like I wish I would have gone to that concert that, was $10 and I didn't want to spend my $10 on the ticket or whatever, right. You just never know who you're going to meet at places like that. So, my tip to my younger self is just get out there more, be more involved in the community and in your scene, help out other artists, volunteer to do stuff, like if they need somebody to work the door, or if they need, if a band needs help breaking down their equipment or whatever, like offer to help and just learn and soak up that knowledge and that, that industry experience, even if it's at the smallest level,
100%, man. That's great advice. 100%. And what would you say at this point is the most rewarding part about what you do for you?
Oh man, for me, honestly, I mean, there's a lot of rewarding parts, so I'm definitely blessed in that sense. But the most rewarding thing is when I can get artists paid, or a producer paid, particularly producers, because producers get screwed so often, man. But like being able to, secure the bag, or secure a check for somebody, make sure that they're getting paid what they're owed. It sounds simple, but it's really hard to get paid in the music industry. Like it is, and a label, let's say you get a big placement. I was just on the phone with a producer who, again, I'm not going to name names, but he produced for a very well-known artist, a song that has like 400 million streams right now.
What?
So it's like a song you've definitely heard, trust me. Wow. But again, I can't say who it is. Never got paid. Okay.
What?
He got paid his initial advance, right? But never got any back end royalties. And it's been like 3 or 4 years. He should have something there. I mean, 300 million streams is not a drop in the bucket. So they, advocating for them, reaching out to the label, figuring out whatever loophole the label's trying to get him in, or whatever like hoops the label's trying to get you to jump, like navigating through that, making some calls and then getting him sent money. Like that's rewarding to me because, again, it's not all about the money. It is about the music, right? But if you don't have the money, you're not going to be able to afford to keep doing the music. And I just want to see, my clients, the artists and producers and everybody that I work with continue to do the thing that they love to do. And if that means, knocking on some doors and making, blowing up people's phones to get people paid, that's what I got to do.
100%, man. That's huge. That's awesome, man. That's definitely a big success story. So that's
absolutely. Yeah.
100%, man. All right, so these next questions here are really just fun questions. So it's just for people to get to know you a little bit more, chill. But you've definitely dropped some gems on this, so I definitely thank you for all of that information.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. So what was your first job, if you've ever had one, other than, because I know you went to college?
Yeah. My first job, God, was this my first job? My first job was technically at a tutoring company. I tutored like underprivileged like kids and stuff like that. So that was nice. But that like barely paid anything. But my first like job was at Walmart.
Oh.
Yeah, I worked in the electronics video game department. I didn't work there for very long. I was only there for like a summer, and then I left and then later got a job. I worked in retail for a while, actually, because then I got a job at PetSmart. And I worked at PetSmart, and they were having me carry, like, the 50-pound bags of dog food, like, out of the truck and load them into the... It was the worst. After a week, I quit. And I still remember to this day that when I told the boss... I called my boss, and I was like, hey, I'm not coming in ever. I'm done. And she was like... well, you're going to be unrehirable by the PetSmart company. And I'm like, that's fine. I'm willing to sacrifice. I'm willing to make that sacrifice. I'm not going to work at PetSmart ever again.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then I worked at Best Buy. And I worked there for a long time. And then
I love that.
I have the name tag right here. I got a job at Walt Disney World.
Oh, that's a good one.
And that was my favorite job ever.
Nice.
And I keep the name tag on my desk just as a reminder of like how far I've come. But I worked at the Haunted Mansion, so I got to load people onto the ride and scare them a little bit and stuff. And that was a great job. If it wasn't minimum wage, I would honestly still work there. So,
Yeah, man, I've heard that that their employees, they love it there.
it's a great place to work, super fun, a lot of great benefits, especially if you love Disney. But yeah, it's just that I needed to get paid more. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
But
That's
when
epic.
I was working at Disney was when I started studying for the LSATs and like
Oh, wow.
applying to law schools and stuff. So, you know, it was a seminal time for me, you know.
Yeah, 100%,
Yeah.
man. That's epic.
Yeah.
If you could instantly master any skill without having to put the work in, what would it be?
Ooh. Any skill. Wow. I would either want to be a Formula 1 driver, right? Just because that's like seems impossible to me to drive that fast and that accurately.
Yeah.
Or I'd want to be able to like hit like 60 home runs, you know, in the major leagues. You know, that would be my skill. Like one of those two skills I think could take me places. You know? So
Definitely.
that would be yeah. If I didn't have to work at baseball, I would play baseball all day, you know.
That's
So.
epic, man. For sure. What is your favorite movie or TV show?
Oof. Favorite movie, there's a few of them. Back to the Future, the whole trilogy is like one of my favorites. Like, you know, Back to the Future is what I would watch like when I was homesick from school, and like, you know, anytime it's on TV, I'm watching it. I can quote like basically the whole film, you know, all three films.
Great movies.
Yeah, so Back to the Future, I'm big on I guess, you know, I grew up in the 90s, but I love the 80s, you know, so like, you know, Back to the Future, E.T., you know, Jaws, like movies like that, like those were, you know, I grew up watching all that stuff. The Goonies Never Say Die, you know, I'm all about that. TV show side, honestly, I got to go with Entourage, you know. I know it's a silly show and it hasn't aged well and all that stuff, but like I loved Entourage. Like it was, you know, it was one of those shows that made me realize that, you know, you don't have to be the superstar to like be part of the team, you know. Like I really, you know, even though he's kind of a weird character, like I always liked the agent Ari Gold, you know, because I felt like he was the one that was really pulling the strings and making things happen for the crew, you know. So
Yeah.
I always wanted to be that guy.
Heck yeah, man. That's dope. And who is your favorite artist or band of all time?
Favorite artist is Prince, 100%. So I love Prince. I'm like, I've dived deep into his catalog, and you know, I've listened to all the rarities and B-sides and live performances that I can find, and just you know, I'm all about Prince. Band, this band called The Replacements. You know, big in like the 90s, 80s, and 90s again. One of the best like punk bands of all time. You know, and I've gotten to meet almost all the members of The Replacements over the years, so that's really cool. Had Tommy Stinson, who was one of the members of The Replacements, on my podcast a few years ago, so you know, super stoked about that. Obviously I never got to meet Prince, but you know, I have met The Replacements, so that's cool.
Oh, that's sick, man. You can't beat that, bro. If that's your favorite band and you had them on, dude, come on.
Dude,
that's epic,
absolutely Yep,
hell yeah.
all about it.
Do you have a go-to karaoke song?
Yes. I don't do it often, but my go-to song is Break On Through by The Doors, or honestly anything by The Doors. You know, Jim, I have kind of a deeper singing voice, similar to Jim Morrison's range, so you know, anything by The Doors I can rock.
Nice, man.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. And last one, what is your dream vacation spot?
Whew. Honestly, my wife and I have been talking about this for a minute, but I think you know, so I mentioned I work there. I'm a big Disney nerd. You know, we go to Disney World like a couple times a month. It's like insane how often we go to Disney World. But my dream vacation would actually be Tokyo Disney. You know, never been to Japan, never been to Tokyo, but I'd love to go, and you know, those parks are supposedly really awesome, so I would love to just see all the rides and stuff there.
Oh,
you know.
Heck yeah, man. That'd be epic. And honestly, man, for a couple of guests now that I've had on, a lot of people are saying Japan. So I'm like, man, maybe I need to go check out Japan.
Yeah. Dude, I would love to go to Japan, you know. Just the architecture and everything in Tokyo is like, you know, I love that like cyberpunk kind of vibe, you know. So it would just be fun to be there, and the food sounds amazing, and it just seems like a good time.
Yeah.
So yeah, Japan, but more specifically Tokyo Disney.
For sure.
Yeah.
No, that's epic. All right. So in closing, do you have any new projects or events coming up that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah. When does this air? I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to see how far ahead I got a plan. The biggest thing for me is I'm working on a redesign of my website, which doesn't sound big, but it is big. Like it's taking up a lot of resources and a lot of time to get it to where I want to be. But I'm going to be launching basically a music law subscription service. So essentially you'll pay monthly and have access to, templates, have access to me to answer questions, have, some quick consultations depending on how many, which service plan you're buying or whatever. And, I'm looking at it as a way to make legal services more accessible, and be able to, if you sign up for these subscription services, you're going to save a lot of money on rather than pricing these services out individually. Sure. And for artists that have like ongoing needs and need that support every single month, I think it's a great opportunity. And there's not really a lot of other attorneys, especially in this space, doing that. So I'm really hyped about that. And the website's going to be kind of a core part of that whole new model, if you will.
Yeah, that's sick, man. I know that could benefit a lot of people.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, but that honestly, at the end of the day, that's what I'm all about. Like I'm not doing, big upfront retainers and billing you for every email that I send and every time I pick up the phone. Like I'm about, clear, transparent, flat fees, subscriptions, I want the artists to know what they're paying before they pay it. And, I don't want you to get a surprise bill at the end of the month being like, oh shit, now I owe $3,000 or whatever. Like I want it to be predictable. And because of that, I think more artists are going to utilize my services because, I can be part of the whole rollout plan. If you're budgeting this much money for marketing and this much money for production, this much money for cover art, now you can say, okay, I'm also going to budget this much for legal,
Yeah, no, 100%, man. That definitely, even to me, I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna be on that, bro. I'm gonna be on that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, like I said, I'm working hard on getting the website going so that people will be able to see everything and sign up really easily. And
nice.
Once hopefully once this podcast drops, that'll be live. Either way, go to randyojeda.law.com, check it out.
Yeah, 100%. And that was leading me into the last and final two things. Any shout outs that you'd like to give or thank yous?
Thank you to everybody that listened to this and watched this and got through, an hour of me. I appreciate that. Big shout out to my fam and my wife and my dog, Miko, who's, I'm excited to get back home to right now, but, for sure. Follow me, I'm at Real Randy Ojeda on all the social platforms. Don't follow the fake Randy Ojeda, follow the real Randy Ojeda.
Oh yeah.
That's me, and I have a Discord server as well. If anybody's into Discord or, into that, we have like about 200 members or so now. And, people ask questions in there that I answer that I think is helpful for a lot of people. I also post sync briefs that I get in the Discord. So if you're looking to break into sync, this is like an easy way to just keep an eye on, stuff that's coming across my desk. And we have a lot of fun. We do like a songwriting competition and, all sorts of stuff in the Discord. So if you want an invite into the Discord, follow my, check out my link in bio or just DM me and I'll send you a link to that too. But, if I can close with anything, I'll just say I'm way more accessible than you realize. Like if you're like, man, I'm intimidated to talk to this guy, don't be. Like talk to me, ask the questions that you want to ask. I'm happy to help.
Yeah. And I love that about you, Randy, how, even ever since I first met you and kind of saw how you were, and I think people can really appreciate that about you, is that you are like very like welcoming and always eager to help. And I've really noticed that about you. So thank you for being like that, on behalf of me and, all the artists. And thank you so much again for coming on this podcast, man. You definitely shared some gems. I will make sure to also put a lot of those links that you mentioned in the description, guys. So make sure to go check those out. But Randy, I just want to thank you again for coming on the Hustle Coast podcast. I want to thank all of our viewers for tuning in to another episode. But hey, it's been real. You guys have a great one.
I gotta get a Hustle Coast hat.
Oh, dude, you gotta get